Hi, everyone, and welcome to day three. Hope everybody's doing well and you're getting used to this a little bit. And again, not panicking. Things will probably get a good deal worse before they get better. But this will pass. Everybody believes that, and it's just a matter of the next few weeks trying to hang in there, adjust to kind of some limitations on the way we live. Um, but again, it's something that we'll get through, and it'll be something that you'll remember for a long time. So, but today, what I thought I'd do is kind of pass along the part three of the Ben Sass and Friedman books that I'm kind of looking at and sharing some of that information with you. If you remember, Ben Sass's book is is about the idea of it's called them, and it's about our despite being connected in more ways than ever, how hard of a time we've had communicating with each other in an effective way, and actually our society being pretty divisive. One of the kind of I guess positives of what's going on now is it does tend to unite people on something like our disease that we have here in the United States. It will unite people and cause us to be less focused on the things that divide us. But what Sass talks about is kind of this idea here of what's caused this. And one of the things that he calls it, and he's kind of entitled Chapter 3, this is polititainment. And what he kind of talks about in this chapter is this idea of what is news, and the idea that we have a 24-hour news cycle, and obviously not concerning what's happening right now, but the idea that on every day of your life, essentially, that there needs to be 24-hour news available, kind of being broadcast. For most of our history, and even recent history, this was not the case. There was news. You used to get a newspaper. You would watch the nightly news. But this idea that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that there was this news that's really worth thinking about and learning about was available is a relatively new concept. And I remember when this changed. In my memory, anyways, this changed right after 9/11, when updates were required. And what ended up happening was the stations competed with one another to see who could get the most relevant, quickest information to you as those attacks happened on 9/11, and it just kind of stayed with us. So you've had it your whole life, but prior to 3 or 4 years before you were born, it wasn't really the way things were done as much as they would be anyways after 9/11. Um, and it's this idea that even in the news, no matter what it is, these stations are like, you really need to hear this next in this update. And everything that they say is of utmost importance for you to tune in and kind of listen to. If you've ever listened to talk radio, sports radio, people screaming and yelling as if the events were life's most important events, you kind of get this sense of what type of journalism and media was created by this. That everything is of utmost importance. When for most of our history we had limited headlines, limited news that we were given, and somehow we were able to survive and actually thrive and maybe be less divisive than we are today. And he talks about the idea of the lanterns in the tower that signaled that the British were coming in the American Revolution. It was a very simple communication device for that purpose. It told people that the Brits were on their way here to engage in the less than friendly actions, and that worked. The light in the bell tower worked to signal that the British were coming. And he kind of uses that to talk about Twitter a little bit. That Twitter and some of our social media platforms today are not the best way to communicate essential truths on in-depth, difficult issues that are trying to be solved in politics or society. It might work for something like what happened in the American Revolution, but it doesn't work so well today. But it's short, it's concise, it tries to make everything simple, but with that, it creates a lot of divisiveness because it oversimplifies things and tends to demonize the other side of things depending upon where the account is coming from. Um, Mark Twain, who you may know, who wrote Huckleberry Finn, was famous for his kind of pithy statements. Those quick little statements that kind of stick with you. Twitter would work great for him, but not so much with in-depth analysis of diplomacy issues or policies that we have, like healthcare for all, or what to do about the border. Some of those other things that kind of tend to get pretty complicated. Another thing he uses to kind of show what the media, the influence, the impact of the media, is this idea of child abductions. Many people today are I don't know about oversensitized, but they're worried about child abductions, when in actuality they're at an all-time low. It's just that they're communicated so often and they're broadcast when they do happen, and thankfully that does happen. But what that does create is this idea that they're happening more than ever, when in actuality that's not true. And that goes along with crime rates in many places too, because it's communicated instantly and to such a grand measure. People have false assumptions about the safety and some of the other things that are out there, and it can create a lot of anxiety and reaction because of that. So he kind of looks at that, and Al Qaeda, some of the terrorist organizations, have learned which targets to kind of use in our society, because they'll create the most hysteria, the most media coverage, and so they've actually learned to use that against us. Something else he brings up. And he also talks about something interesting, maybe you've heard about, confirmation bias. One of the things that divides us as Americans, rather than having an open mind to information and things like that, we tend to look for things that will confirm what we already believe. So he uses an example in Nebraska, his father and his grandfather arguing over a light on Route 77 in Oahu, Nebraska, where some people say it was necessary to have that light there, and others would say no. And so I don't remember which side it was, but let's say his father always had a negative view of the light, and he remembers is no matter what's happening in his mind, he always gets stuck at this light. It's always red. It always makes me stop. It always gets in the way of what I'm trying to do. While his grandfather, who had a positive view of the light, always says he never gets stuck at the light. It's always green. So Ben Sasse went and actually timed the light and realized that it took 2 minutes. It turned red. It was on this continuous cycle all the time, and it was always 2 minutes from green to red and red to green. And so he brings up the point that each one of them remembers the light in a certain way that confirmed what they already thought about it. So it overemphasized the times when it was right or green, depending upon your perspective. And we do this all the time with things. Something that we need to pay attention to, that we learn. We yearn for internal coherence to what we already believe over what's actually true. And can correspond to reality. And basically, it just means we're biased. Being aware of that bias, though, is what helps us to kind of work through it and maybe communicate better with others. Think of a close call in a football game, depending upon which side you're cheering for. I'm a Patriot fan, so we have a reputation of, the referees. Everybody kind of thinks the referees always give us the calls, and we always sit there and scream, no, they're all good calls, and you guys are just jealous, and all of those things. But that's kind of an illustration of this bias we're talking about. We'll look at those calls in a different way depending upon what our pre-existing bias is. Certainly Tom Brady going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is big news right now, and you'll see a lot of, emotional responses to that, and I'm not immune to that either. But being aware of our biases goes a long way for us to kind of get control over those and actually seek out truth and things that, relevant information that may actually inform us on topics. He brings up some demographics about the media and outlets, how most of them, or the biggest, largest ones, are located on the coasts, and that the educational demographic of the reporters and the media moguls, that 92% of them have at least a bachelor's degree, which compared to the United States as a whole, only 1/3 of Americans have a bachelor's degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and only 93% of them are of a certain political party that are on our, that, again, mirroring the cities um, that these networks are actually a part of. And so oftentimes, his point is that even there, if you're not aware of that, it may largely paint the way you see the world. You see common day, everyday happenings. If you don't live in those areas, you will see, the point is that you may see the world quite a bit different. If I were to ask you, he brings this up, what are the 3 best-selling vehicles in the United States? Just let you think about that for a second. Would you be surprised to learn that the 3 best-selling vehicles in the United States are pickup trucks? And a lot of people had a hard time with that when they heard that, because especially if they lived in certain areas, they didn't know hardly anybody that had pickup trucks. Where if you lived in the heartland of the United States, maybe most of the people did. Certainly, the author of this book grew up in Nebraska, so he'll tell you, a lot of people that I knew had pickup trucks. But again, it shows this kind of confirmation bias that we may be susceptible to. A famous statement was made in 1972, in the presidential election, where a film critic for the New Yorker, when he found out, she actually found out that Richard Nixon had won the presidency, she famously claimed, "I didn't know anybody that voted for him." And yet he had one of the largest, if not the largest, popular vote, 61% or something like that of the vote in U.S. history. But to her point, she, in her circles where she lived and the media, she didn't know anybody that voted for him. So it kind of shows us at times that our inability to kind of communicate kind of comes through that bias and maybe where we live and what our experiences have been. He experienced this himself. I think I've told you that he's a Republican conservative, but he has you can face this because he hasn't always agreed with the president, and he has actually criticized the president at times, and many people have had a hard time with that. As well as he's had the other side, the liberal side, reach out to him as if he was one of theirs, and they quite don't know quite what to do with him, because both sides will react in different ways depending upon issues that he takes, and so they don't really know what to do. He also talks about the polarization that happens even in the media, and he brings up the idea that both the left and the right tend to give the worst examples of the other side and then criticize it. So whether you turn on a conservative news channel, a liberal news channel, or read the newspapers that from both sides, you'll see the worst case example. I mean, you can see this even with the picture sometimes they put up. You see it in political campaigns, the very worst picture you can imagine, and then there's a headline attached to it. But it's kind of this journalism where, and he says this is on both sides, it doesn't matter what political party, it's kind of this attitude when you report, can you believe what just happened? And not only can't you believe it, but you should be really mad about it too. And this is every day, some of these news shows, like outrage every single day. And that also creates this atmosphere where people are trying to protect themselves, defend themselves, and always on this defensive posture, and maybe respond in kind. It creates an atmosphere where everybody starts responding back the same way. So that's the other thing that he brings up. He also brings up, if you ever go on a website and you look at where the share button is, oftentimes the share button is at the top of the article as opposed to the bottom, because these news agencies know that most Americans won't even get through the top first part, 1/3 of the article, and they'll hit share. And the headlines that they use are absolutely important to get them to think that this will confirm what they already believe. They read a couple lines and they share it, as opposed to reading it in depth and seeing what's true, what might be lacking in the article. So they know this, and it's a way for them to kind of sell their product as well, and appeal to their audience at the same time. The other thing he says is that we have less shared experiences as Americans. I think I mentioned this in class a couple times, but at one time, and then go back to the early 1960s, 2/3 of Americans, I want you to think about that number, 2/3 of all Americans watched I Love Lucy television show. And that was huge. I mean, that was astronomical numbers. And it was, so 2/3 think of that, somewhere around, 67% of the country. The closest that we've had since then is 14% watching Sunday Night Football. So think of the vast difference in the division and the different experiences we have as Americans. 54% of our country in 1983 watched the finale of MASH. And so many, they set a record in New York City for plumbing in terms of the number of people that went and flushed toilets at the same time because they waited until the show was over. And that was huge, 54% of Americans. And it showed you that we had common social cues that we shared with one another. Massive number of people that tuned into a show like MASH or I Love Lucy. The other thing that you think of today when I'm talking about some of these news shows, whether it be on Fox or MSNBC or CNN, the top news program that airs in prime time only gets 1% of the population to tune in, like 3 million people or so. And the second place is less than 1%. And everybody else is fragmented. This week you're probably going to binge watch some things on Netflix or whatever, and that's kind of becoming the norm as opposed to groups of massive numbers of people gathering together to watch the same show. That's kind of a thing of the past, which is a bit sad, but that does explain why so many of our people today are polarized. Why they only watch one channel, they don't compare and contrast. And we've lost the ability to kind of be outside of our tribe. And this, I guess the scary thing as I think about this is a nation that's so diverse like we are, which is really a strength of who we are and can add to the beauty of our nation in so many ways. If everybody's in their own little tribe and is unwilling to listen to the other side, that's where some real problems can take place. Everybody talks about bipartisanship and coming together, but it's a bit harder to do that when you lose, capital, you lose maybe money or support, and then things get real. Are you willing to go along by pursuing truth if it costs you something personally? And that's a hard question for everybody to answer. It's easy to say it when it doesn't happen. It's a lot harder to say it when you actually go through it. So that was kind of Sass, and he talked about polarization business model and some of those things that we see at the heart of our society, and we shouldn't be surprised. Switching gears now to Thomas Friedman and The World is Flat. The idea that, again, having equal playing field for all has really been a new thing that you've kind of experienced your whole life, and the competition that you have to succeed comes from everybody, because people have access to technology now. Really, anybody anywhere can compete with top people that used to depend upon where you lived and what city you were in. Now you can be anywhere as long as you're connected, and you can make a mark and make a name for yourself. So the fourth force that flattened the world, or made this kind of equal playing community, was this idea of uploading the power of communities. Okay, and he talks about the idea of the open source community, or companies making programming instructions for software that was now available to all. So this used to be just available to companies like IBM. He talks about, well, now this kind of open source community was now available to you and I. And we could have software that competed with the top companies in our country. And it's kind of like, he calls it, it's like peer-reviewed science. These open communities, you can kind of get into chat rooms and talk about how you would make the software better and offer improvements and changes for the benefit of everybody. And it would be changed, and you could have access to this. You could download it for free. And this started to be an alternative from the major companies that were making massive amounts of money doing this. And so what people got as a reward for this was a reputation. Maybe people knew who you were because you improved software. But what changed everything is that people could now, on their computers, create their own empires, if you think of it that way. Um, and you know, one of the things that happened, think about like Microsoft. If you don't want to buy Microsoft Office, you know, he has the number of $300. I don't know what it is today. You know, a lot of computers come equipped with it now, but to purchase it, it can be quite expensive to use Microsoft Word and Excel and some of those other things. What this did, though, was it created a market where a lot of this open source idea, people started to create alternatives to this for free, and it competed with Microsoft and some of these big, you know, big companies. Um, and probably one of the best examples of this is Firefox, which was created this way as an alternative to Internet Explorer, which you know which was making a lot of money. And a 19-year-old from Stanford and another 24-year-old individual from another part of the world worked on Firefox, and it took 5% of the market away from Internet Explorer, this kind of open sharing idea. I know that I used to use Firefox, and I liked it quite a bit. I've gone to Google Chrome since, and many of you kind of probably have done the same thing. But you know, it has really changed the way we do things. You know, and I've talked in class a bit about the gold rush of 1849. And you know, today, just to show you how this works, you can have open source people where they're using computers to best predict where you will find gold, and sharing where that might be, and people, you know, contacting these individuals that will do, you know, computer programming to best predict where you might find gold under the earth. So think of that even today, that the gold rush is being done uh, digitally, and a lot of you are aware also of YouTube, which is another part of this open source idea, the technology that's changed everything. That you can go on YouTube and you know, like this video I'm doing, and upload things, and imagine what that does and how that changes things. I could be conducting this anywhere in the world, and you could have access to it, and it really wouldn't matter. So people that used to not have a voice today, through something like YouTube, are actually being given a voice through this leveling of the playing field, of being on the same page. You know, doing something like this, when I grew up, you'd have to go into a studio of some kind, and obviously you have to be somebody and have some connections to even make that a possibility. Well, today all you need is internet access and YouTube, and you can make it happen. Wikipedia, you've heard a lot about since you've been growing up, about not to trust it and not to use it as a reliable source and some of those other things, and I agree with a lot of that criticism, certainly. But Wikipedia has expanded information greatly. It's kind of that open source idea that it will self-correct. Like if you put something up erroneously, somebody that does know the material will be active and will say, no, that's not right, and fix it, and give you a heads up that some of the information might not be relevant and true. But Wikipedia has given people that ability too. It means, you know, I still remember when I was a kid that the encyclopedia salesman would come to your door and they would say, you know, I was a little kid, they would try to get my parents, you know, don't you want to give your kids the best encyclopedias you possibly could? And, you know, you'd have to find room in your house for these massive books. But today, something like Wikipedia is where people go first. It's the first thing that comes up. And to be fair and honest, most of the information there, I would say, is relatively trustworthy. It's just that when you're writing something or you're researching something, you want to go beyond that to make sure and to check. And there's better sources that are peer reviewed on a much higher level and things like that. Um, he also talked about the other thing that kind of leveled the playing field was this Y2K, which you don't remember. But when the calendars, the clocks around the world, the year 2000 came about, everybody was worried that the computer systems of our world were going to crash, because you know, they wouldn't be able to handle the year 2000 digitally. You know, and I remember hearing that planes were going to fall out of the sky if you were on a plane. The stock market was going to crash. Everything that we know it would just go crazy. But what happened was those internal clocks in the computers just needed to be adjusted. and they needed a tremendous number of software engineers to do it, a huge number to do it. Well, one of the places they went to get this huge number of people to fix this was India. And so many of those people, all of a sudden, I think I talked to you yesterday, there was a dot-com boom where everybody understood with fiber optics and this internet thing was huge. There was also the bubble burst, though, because of so many people over-investing in it and doing that. But what ended up happening was because of that, this connected India with the United States in a much larger number than previously, and so many of those engineers were able to get involved in working and solving problems. And businesses did not soon forget that as people kind of maybe moved from India to here to take part in this dot-com growth. They may have moved back to India, but the people that they were involved with here remembered who they were and how much expertise they had. And as work came in and as they needed more and more people to get things done, they remembered them and began to contact them about doing that work. Would you be willing to do this work for less money? And many of them were certainly able and wanted to do that. And so that's what started to change too. So a scary thing like Y2K actually helped to flatten the world because you needed so many people involved now to fix it. And they started to realize that an entire accounts payable department from a business could move to India, get the job done much quicker and cheaper, and help you with your business, as it was. And so tomorrow I'll go over the next flattener, which I think you're already probably figuring out what's going to happen next. If you can do an accounts payable department over in India to help you make more money, why not move the whole company there? And so, and you're so used to this, it doesn't really, you're like, yeah, I know this. But, think of this was not really that long ago. And things were done much differently, how quickly this moved this way. And so we see that, and I think the two, again, I'm going to keep telling you, I think the two books work together well because one of them talks about how divided we are, and the other one talks about how unified we are, that the world is small, it's flat, and at the same time, though, we are so divided in so many ways. And why is that? And is there a way to bridge this gap and work together? And I think what we're going through right now is a great example of what can happen. I miss you guys a lot, and I miss doing my job. I miss seeing you, it's not cliche. I actually enjoy interacting with you and joking with you, and at times being sarcastic with you. You picking on me, that's fine. I'm sure you are with these videos, actually. But it is nice just to, even if you've had a bad day or you're tired in the morning, or you guys tend to energize me, and I hope I do the same for you at times. In the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have to get more structured with assignments and things like that to get you to pass your junior and senior year. But I want you to think about this time that sometimes learning is just cool just to do it. It's worth doing, worth reading, worth thinking about, and be positive. Try to break your time up the best you can. Embrace this time, even though it seems like it's going to be a long time. It'll be over before you know it, and and it's just something to keep in perspective. Okay, that certainly, even though the biggest doomsayers right now are saying by the summer, this a lot of life will be back to normal in many ways. I don't know. I can't predict anything, but just make the most of this time and get your rest and enjoy it. So, anyways, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, and we'll keep going. All right, and no matter how long we're out, I'll keep giving you something every day, and I hope all's well, and I will virtually talk to you soon.